not about accepting that we have to roll over and have our stomach tickled because China's so big and powerful. It's just a lot of this is about minimizing risk, about protecting ourselves.
So let's go to our top story then. Is China a threat to national security? Well, the UK and US, as we know, have exposed China's global campaign of cyber attacks, with the state targeting democracies with the aim of repressing critics. China's hit back at the accusations, saying that Washington should stop its own cyber attacks, while calling the UK's evidence inadequate. Meanwhile, The Times reports Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden is close to bringing in new restrictions against Chinese state-linked companies operating in Britain. But there is division in government about how severe sanctions should be. Let's speak to Bob Seeley now, Tory MP and member of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. Good afternoon, Bob.
Okay, good afternoon to your listeners and viewers.
Thank you. Well, look, several of your colleagues in IPAC have been targeted, as we heard yesterday. Ian Duncan-Smith, Tim Lawton amongst them. Do you worry about what China might have on you, Bob? I wonder if you've asked someone to have a look at this for you.
Not really. I mean, apparently every single member of IPAC's been targeted, but nobody's particularly said that I've been. I was in the military beforehand for about 10 years, and I'm sort of suspecting that anyone who would have done a bit of network analysis would have sort of picked up my email or address or telephone number en route over the last 10 years. So even before I came into Parliament, there's always a chance that you ping up on somebody's radar. And I'm pretty relaxed about anything I've said and done, either on email and social media. But for sure, if you are a spy agency, spot weaknesses in other human beings. So if they think you're having affairs, or you're using drugs, or you've got a drink problem, or you access pornography, all these things allow you to be blackmailed for sure.
And it might not be what they have on you, but what they do with your data that might concern me, Bob. You, as a politician, will make sure that you don't, that you behave appropriately. Hopefully, that is the case with most politicians, and that you're careful about what information you're giving out to whom and how. But what about your own sort of personal data, about how that might be manipulated? Do you sort of worry about family and stuff like that? I mean, this case has kind of caused a lot of people to think quite searchingly about how they might be affected.
Good question, Kate. Look, I think it's important to understand why Russia, but also in this case, clearly China, wants to target and hoover up people's information. And I think there are basically four reasons. They collect large amounts of their own people's information. There are justified reasons for doing it, but the less justified and the more unpleasant reasons is because they want to spy on their own people to make rebellion or revolt or thinking bad things about the communist regime in China increasingly impossible. And with Muslim minorities, they simply want to oppress them. Okay, so that's the first point, but that's in China. Secondly, they want access to intellectual property. They want to steal this stuff because it just saves millions and years of research to do this development themselves. For our data, they collect large amounts of data or try to steal large amounts of data because if they're building up target packs on individuals, potentially members of parliament, potentially more importantly, computer scientists working up in Cambridge on the latest AI, cutting edge research in pharmaceuticals or big data out of Oxford or Durham or Manchester universities in graphite and other things like that. So this is just useful building block information. And the fourth reason they want this information is because in the not too distant future, we're going to be using artificial intelligence and big data to manipulate information. And therefore, to just collect a great deal of information out there in the world is a very useful thing, because one day you'll be able to process it much faster than you can now. The simple rule for all this stuff, Kate, is that increasingly information and data is power.
And look, I think we can safely say that the UK is being targeted. It is a greater threat to the UK, these cyber attacks, than ever before. And so there have been various discussions about how we try and clamp down on this if we can, and what sort of actions are appropriate against countries like China. Where do you stand on this? At the moment, we understand Oliver Dowden's tussling really with the fact that at the moment China's called a challenge, but should we change that wording to threat?
Look, I think on balance we should, but what we need is consistency. There is no point. China is a major player in the world. It's got a huge economy, the second biggest. I'm not sure it's ever going to overtake the States, because I think there are inherent problems in communist dictatorships, even quite efficient ones. But but it is a major power and we have to deal with it. And we have to deal with it in a way that we didn't have to with the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union set up a rival economic system where China, for better or worse, is plugged into the global economy. We need consistency. I'm actually working on something that I think some of your Times colleagues are interested in, a project with Civitas, the think tank, to come up with a coherent China policy and what a coherent China policy looks like. And myself and a guy called Rob Clark are working on that. And I hope to get that out by May, June at the latest. And this isn't just about one individual thing. It's not just about them spying. It's about the role of Confucius Institutes, where the Chinese state keeps an eye on Chinese students, but also Hong Kong students here as well. It's about TikTok having one set of algorithms in China and a different set of algorithms outside China. It's about whether we sell arms to Taiwan. It's about the supply of rare earth minerals. It's about our crucial supply lines for all the things that we need, be it cars, be it computer chips, all these things. And it's about understanding our exposure to China, because if China starts a war in the South China Sea and we put down sanctions, because we are now so exposed to China in so many elements of our life, we will effectively collapse ours and the global economy by putting sanctions on China should it try to invade Taiwan. And what China wants above all, Kate, is the ability to attack Taiwan and not have to pay a price. So this question is really, really broad. And above all, we need a consistent, robust approach. And a lot of this is about protecting ourselves. It's not about waving bony fingers at people, but it's understanding and minimizing the risk that we have to China.
And look, how much of this is done on a departmental basis? We had Gillian Keegan, the education secretary, on Breakfast today talking about Confucius Institutes and insisting that the UK had clamped down on that. Now, there's various bits of reporting out. Some is that there are still operating, freely, that there isn't enough restriction on them, that they're still opening, roundly opening still. Do you sort of feel like there might be a bit of misunderstanding, perhaps, in various departments about how you can piece these actions together?
I think that's right. You make a really good point. Look, I got highest regard for Gillian, and education has been a massive success story under the Conservatives. Domestic education with secondary schools, with primary schools. But looking at the China issue here, it is a fair criticism of this government and indeed any previous governments when they're dealing with Russia or when they're dealing with China, that we have not been coherent enough, and it has been too difficult to deliver a cross-governmental program. And we have to work harder for government departments to act seamlessly together. That is not a criticism of any of this government, which I'm a big supporter of. It is a general statement about the way that government has worked in this country really since the 1990s onwards, but potentially before that. We need a greater sense of coherence, and we need a greater sense of having an overview of how we can robustly defend ourselves, understand China's significant role in the world, but actually make sure that we're protecting our people, our data, but also minimizing our exposure should this relationship get much worse.
And is that one of the sort of key cornerstones of your policy suggestion on what a coherent approach to China looks like?
Yes, it is. So it's and again, a lot of this is, and Charlie Parton, who's one of these leading experts, ex-Foreign Office, who's done a lot of work on this. This is not about attacking people. It's not about accepting that we have to roll over and have our stomach tickled because China's so big and powerful. It's just a lot of this is about minimizing risk, about protecting ourselves. Let me give you some examples. On TikTok, the algorithm on TikTok in China effectively tries to make Chinese kids smart by giving them puzzles, etc., etc. The TikTok algorithms outside China is about getting people addicted to TikTok. So one of the things we could say to the Chinese, if you want TikTok in this country, you either change its algorithms or you get rid of it. Because it is, I know it sounds ridiculous to say this, or some people will think it sounds daft, but TikTok is effectively a weapon to make Chinese kids smart and Western kids dumb because of the different algorithms. So we have to understand how these social media tools are being used by authoritarian states in ways in which we find difficult to get our heads around. You look at supply lines, okay, give you one other example. We could be doing DNA research, quite easy to do DNA on cotton coming into this country, a lot of it by the big corporations and the big international firms, to find out how much of it is coming from slave labor out of Xinjiang province. because we don't want slave labor in the global economy for moral reasons and economic reasons. A huge amount of that is moral reasons, and we could be doing more on that front as well. So those are just two examples in a really wide field.
Yeah, and I'm interested in what you've had to say about TikTok. Obviously, the United States are, working through new laws.
Well, they're going to force its sale. They're going to force its sale.
Well, they want it to come under US ownership, and if it doesn't come under US ownership, then it will not exist in the US anymore. Would you like to see something similar? That is very, very direct, targeted action. It's very, very specific. It is strong. But would you like to see something similar from us here in the UK?
Yes, although the question is, the Americans are saying we don't mind the algorithms, but we don't want the information going back to China because of big data and AI being able to crunch this data and understand people's, how to manipulate people in the future. Remember that I think the critical thing here, Kate, is that dictatorships, freedom is a threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to dictatorships everywhere. So the more that dictatorships can know how to mold and manipulate people, the more that dictatorships can survive. That is bad for humanity. So we don't want that information going back to China when China is a communist dictatorship, which is building up the means of censorship and control, not loosening. But for me, it's also an issue of the algorithms. That the algorithms, the TikTok algorithms in our country is to get people addicted to using TikTok. TikTok's algorithms in China are designed to encourage Chinese kids to be smart and to do puzzles, etc., etc.
The message is loud and clear. Bob Seeley, thank you for speaking to us. Some really interesting thoughts there. Bob Seeley, Conservative MP, member of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Good to speak to you. Thank you.